Welcome to a Wonder Junkie podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Anderson.
Nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows. Nobody has the faintest idea. The best guesses are lies. You may be sure of it.
Hi, Elaine. Thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me. I'm happy
Yeah.
to be here.
Absolutely. I really just wanted to record a conversation with you because I met you 2 summers ago at the Four Corners gathering, and I just really appreciated who you are. And I've gotten to connect with you a few times after that through Being True to You's program, which I took part in. And I like who you are. I think you're a kind person, and I think more people need to be exposed to who you are. And I just want to share some of your essence and your story. And
Thank you.
so here we are, and I'm glad you're in Phoenix today and here for a couple of weeks, I'm guessing.
No, I'm leaving on Friday.
Okay, you're leaving, but you're here for Shen Yun.
Yep, here for Shen Yun.
And maybe we could just start a little bit with, what is Shen Yun?
Yeah, so I'm here for Shen Yun Performing Arts, which is a Chinese classical dance performance. And let's see where to start. Shen Yun started in 2006 by people that had fled China for persecution for their faith. And so I got involved with Shen Yun about 4 or 5 years ago when I started practicing Falun Dafa, also called Falun Gong. And so I'll tell the story about Falun Dafa a little bit, and then I can explain how Shen Yun fits into that. So,
Perfect.
yeah, I started practicing back in 2020, and I'll share more about that in a minute. But Falun Gong is a spiritual practice from China. It's based on the 3 principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance, or forbearance. It's also translated Zhen Shan Ren. And it's a free practice. It's free all over the world. And it's just about cultivating those 3 principles in your heart. The book that we study a book. And the book is about how to live those principles in your everyday life. And then we do 5 Qigong type exercises. So really simple practice, no money exchange. It's an ancient practice that was passed down from teacher to student for thousands of years. And it was open to the public in China. Like they made it public in 1992. And people experienced just miraculous health benefits from it. Crime rates went down in certain areas. It had just like really strong effect on society. Again, always free. And so it grew within, let's see, about 5-6 years. It grew to 100 million people in China practicing. Wow. So like 1 in 12 people.
Wow. And what's the persecution like, or what were they fleeing from?
Yeah, so the persecution started in 1999. The Communist Party in China wanted Shen Yun to come under wanted Falun Gong to come under the state. And they wanted it to be separate from the state, not controlled. And so the Communist Party started trying to ruin its reputation and its name. And they had like different stunts for doing that, like the Tiananmen Square incident. And then they made it illegal. And so in 1999, they fully illegalized it. They banned it. And so people that were practicing were getting arrested and thrown into prisons, into labor camps. And then to this day, and the Chinese Communist Party has been, it's been thought that they've been doing forced organ harvesting for like the last 3 decades. But it really started to ramp up in 2002, 2001, around then, a bunch of organ harvesting or like a bunch of organ transplant centers, about 100 opened up around China around that time. And so people were calling in and, foreigners would go there to get organs like quickly, not knowing where they were coming from.
Wow.
And they were harvesting them from their prison system, which was proven in a tribunal that was held in 2019.
Wow.
Where they said without a doubt that they're doing organ harvesting at a large scale in China. And so it's been going on for the past 25 years or so. And it's really just that the practice grew really big in China. So 1 in 12 people practicing. the state felt like, oh no, what if we can't control people? And they felt
Mm-hmm.
scared, I think, or jealous or something. And so they made it illegal at that time.
Wow. And is it really hard to find conversations about this, like what we're sharing right now and what you're talking about, or is it pretty broadly
It's really easy,
really easy?
actually. Like if you talk to any practitioners of Falun Dafa, they'll tell you exactly what I'm telling you.
Mm-hmm.
So it's weird to me that, like, there's been stuff going on right now with like the New York Times, that they've come after Shen Yun and they've come after Falun Dafa,
Mm.
and they haven't actually like interviewed anyone that currently practices it. They didn't interview any current dancers. They didn't interview anyone that's actually practicing Falun Dafa.
Mm-hmm.
They interviewed people that were like slightly disgruntled, and there's not that many of them, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And so it felt really like biased. And we know, those of us that have done research and been reading, like, what's been going on the past 25 years. They the New York Times editor went on a trip to Beijing in 2001.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, there was no media, foreign media, at least from the US, allowed in China at the time.
Wow.
After that trip, the New York Times was able to set up an office in Beijing.
Mm.
And so it's speculated that like they made some kind of a deal, and that's why they don't report on the organ harvesting, number one, and number
Mm-hmm.
two, why they're like going after Shen Yun, which, like,
Mm.
Shen Yun Performing Arts, I'll go into that.
Yeah.
We're getting bomb threats like at almost every theater, like
Wow.
from the Chinese Communist Party. So
Mm.
have you ever heard of like a theater show, a dance performance, getting bomb threats before?
No. And has anything ever happened to one of these
No,
No.
no,
It's
never.
just constant fear mongering, or
Yeah, like there's there's been CCP interference where like they've slashed bus tires and stuff like that before, which is
Mm.
actually really dangerous
Sure.
because they don't pop until you actually get on the highway, and then it's really dangerous
Here in the States, or
in the States and
wow.
other places
And it was
too.
proven.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Poland got a bomb threat this year.
That's
Europe.
wild.
Yeah. So, and then the headquarters of Shen Yun in Dragon Springs in New
Mm-hmm.
York, they've gotten tons of bomb threats this year, other kinds of threats. So yeah,
Mm.
it's ramped up this year, especially. Like it's gotten worse
Mm.
in this last 6 months or so since the New York Times started their
It's
campaign.
fascinating. And then, like, I recently actually just had a woman named Catherine Liu on, and she writes books. One's called Traumatized. She's actually in the middle of writing it, and she's pretty against Shen Yun and against
Mm,
this whole practice. And just off the cuff, it was like, oh, it's a cult, and I feel like
yeah,
that's the way that the propaganda or the messaging comes forth for most people,
yeah,
and they don't understand what it actually is, and they've just been given this. It's sort of like what's happening in the United States with ideology and dividing people and getting everyone to think, well, it's all bad or it's all this. And
yeah.
so it sounds like this is a similar psyop.
Yeah, I mean that's what the Chinese Communist Party were the original people that were calling it a cult. So it's just their propaganda that's come into the US. And
Mm,
I think like people are just naturally afraid of like things like that. I think things like where people are devoting themselves to a certain spiritual practice. I think
mm-hmm,
like if it's something that's newer, and this one is 1992, even though it's an ancient practice,
mm,
I think maybe people, they're not sure.
mm,
But no money exchange. Like, what kind of cult do you know that doesn't exchange money?
mm-hmm,
Our teacher, we learned from him. We don't worship our teacher.
mm.
Um,
Who's the teacher?
Li Hongzhi.
And he's how old?
He's like in his 70s.
And he revised or revamped and brought this all forth from how? From his teacher? Or
Yeah, so he had it passed down to him, and he made it open to the public. But he's like, you I don't need my followers or people that like that I'm their teacher. I don't need them to worship me.
mm-hmm,
Um, just it's practicing truth, compassion, tolerance. So
beautiful.
yeah, so it's funny that people hear that. I think they just hear it. Like there was a guy last night at Shen Yun who said that Falun Dafa teaches mind control or something like that, and I was like, huh,
Mm,
because it's truth, compassion, tolerance. Like, and I wondered where people get their
mm-hmm.
ideas from and where they're reading it.
And the truth part, and like when you start diving into this philosophy, which we can do or not do depending on how
Hmm.
far you want to go, but what is it seeking truth, speaking truth, or how does that work? Or inner truth? What is the truth
Um,
piece like when it's being spoken of?
yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I would say living your life in alignment to your values. I would say, yeah, speaking the truth, being an honest person, because there's the foundations of Falun Dafa are Buddhist and Taoist, and
Okay.
so Taoism is really about seeking truth. That's like
Mm-hmm.
the foundation of Taoism, and so that's going to be a part of it. And then the foundation of Buddhism is compassion.
Okay.
And so it's about saving all life and all beings. So
Awesome.
all the Buddhist teachers, like the different Buddhist pathways that you see, it's not about just like in Taoism, it's usually passed down to one person at a time, whereas in Buddhism, it's like open to everybody to provide pathways to salvation for people.
Okay, so if you were to tell someone, like I'm asking you now, what is your spiritual belief system based on? You would say Buddhism, or would you say Falun
I
Dafa?
would say truthfulness, compassion, and forbearance.
I like that.
I
Cool.
would say that's what
Yeah,
and if people ask me, about, um, my teacher and who is he, and he's to me, he's the embodiment of those three qualities.
cool. I like that. And so today I'm going to my second Shen Yun performance in Mesa, and I loved the first one. I think I went probably 2018 or 19, somewhere before COVID. I know that because that's such a landmark now. We use that to define things. But
Yeah,
I found out about it through Nick Janicki
yeah,
because he got me into floating because he owned the first float center here in the valley.
yeah,
And so I used to go float way back in the day. I think it was around 2010 or 11, somewhere around there. And I found all that's because I think he's quite a practitioner of it as well. And
yeah.
he's a big sponsor of the events here, and he really puts a lot of his energy into it.
Hmm.
And then it's funny because I came back to it. I think he initially gave me the original smaller book with just the, what is that one called?
Falun Gong.
Falun Gong. And I liked it. I read it and I liked the principles. And I was hoping to find it. I couldn't. Maybe I gave it to someone actually because I give books away a lot. But anyway, yeah, I just feel like I'm excited to talk to him more about it and start learning more about it. And then Deanne as well. She goes, you have to buy. I think this is the book,
Yeah,
which I just got not too long ago. And so I'm excited to dive into it and to see more about it. And she raves about it as well. So, and you and I connected through a same circle as I was at Four Corners. Nick was out there speaking, and I didn't know he would be there.
yeah.
I didn't know what Being True to You was. I actually went to see Robert Forte speak,
And he didn't
and
make
he
it.
didn't make it. And I ended up having him as my first guest on this show. But yeah, so
Hmm.
I ended up out there, and I met all of you guys, and I really loved the community.
Hmm.
And so being true to you is special. And I'd love to get into how you got there and what being true to you is and what you do for them. But let's go back. And I want to go back to like, what were your core belief systems? What was growing up like for you?
Yeah,
And how did you end up getting here? Let's hear a little bit about you.
yeah. So let's see where to start. I grew up Christian. My
Okay,
my family is like born again Christian. My
cool.
mom especially.
Yeah.
And so I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago. Christian family, near Wheaton College, which is like a well-known Christian area college over there. Um, it never quite resonated with me, Christianity. I mean, I considered myself a Christian until like my late 20s. And I feel like that was because I was too afraid to let it go.
Mm,
Um, and I never felt a connection to it. And that I think that was hard for me growing up because everybody was like, I went to a Christian school growing up and everybody was like so connected to it and they'd be like swaying and like, feeling the
mm-hmm,
presence of God. And I just never had that connection with it.
mm.
And so,
Did you have a connection to God though as you were in that phase of your life? Not even like a,
not at all.
okay, I was just
Mm-mm.
curious.
No, I mean, I believed that there was a God, but I don't think my mind was like open in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I had, I'm a sensitive person and my household was a little bit rough growing up. And so,
Mm,
um, I think for that reason, I was kind of like shut down and had like a pretty big shell on over me.
yeah.
And then, and like my parents are great, my siblings are great, but it was just my dad he'd gone through a really messy divorce, and there's just a lot of stress in the household. So it wasn't like an abusive household, but um, just my dad had a really short fuse.
Mm-hmm.
So, and my older brother too, and we're all close now, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, at the time it was just, I think thinking back, like, there, I never really connected to like spirituality. I would read a lot from like the Beat generation. That was what I was into at that age, like 12 or 13.
More rebellion, like countercultural stuff.
Yeah,
Cool.
stuff like that.
Hmm.
And then let's see, I moved to Miami for grad school when I was in my mid 20s. And there I finally like fully gave up Christianity, and I was just like, I'm gonna be atheist.
Yeah.
And so I was atheist for about 6 months, and then
What were you studying, and like what led you to sort of realize that you even needed to shed the belief system?
I don't know. I don't remember what I was reading or studying. I don't think it was spiritual.
Yeah.
But I think that I'd really descended into like just nothing matters. And like I found out one of my best friends was having an affair with one of our professors. Like that affected me in a pretty big way. He was a married professor and much older than us. And like I don't know, I just felt like nothing here really matters. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of descended into chaos, and Miami's not the best place to descend
Right.
into chaos into.
Yeah.
So I went, kind of far down that path. And then, but about 6 months after I was like, I'm atheist, suddenly like the world around me started to speak to me. It was almost like I needed to let go of the Christianity to open myself up. And then like I would have really profound dreams, and like I would feel connections to things in nature and stuff like that.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that started me, like I became really sensitive to just like feeling things. Not, I never see visions or anything, but feeling. And so then I started to like engage more in new age spirituality, new age texts and things like that. And what I liked about it is like Christianity couldn't speak to that, at least like the Bible as we know it. And today it didn't like talk about any of that kind of stuff. Like there's Jesus's miracles, but doesn't explain when stuff starts to open up to you really. I think there's like missing texts from the Bible that probably do have that stuff, but
Sure.
not the stuff that I have been connected to. And I also didn't know how to read the Bible.
Yeah.
I didn't know how to read the Bible until listening to Jordan Peterson, honestly, when he talked about like his Bible series
Right.
and explains like what the stories mean.
Yeah. And not so literally and more existentially and like
Yeah.
psychologically
And how they're
analyzing.
metaphoric, like metaphors for things.
Yeah. Same
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
When you were like sort of losing your faith, becoming atheist and nihilistic in a way,
Yeah.
did you go into like drugs and alcohol and abusive like patterns to yourself?
I was I never used drugs and alcohol. I mean drugs, never used drugs really. I didn't even use psychedelics at the time. And then I would say I engaged in certain activities that were harming my soul more than
Okay.
anything else.
Yeah.
And alcohol was a part of it, but I had like gut issues that started to come up at the time. So I actually quit alcohol around like 30 years old. I just quit drinking. Um, like, just it was really making me tired, and like my hangovers would last for days, and I would get really, really depressed. So my body wouldn't let me do that anymore. So I really wasn't drinking at the
Yeah.
time, but just like engaging in other things that weren't good for me.
And
Yeah.
what did you study out there? What was your...
I did social science research. So
Got it.
I think my degree's in like it might be cultural anthropology.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you have an orientation at the time of what you thought you would be doing versus obviously what you're doing now?
Yeah, I thought that I would like, I was like, oh, I want to be like a professor. Like I want to
Oh.
teach or research or something. And when I started going to grad school, and it just wasn't what I thought it would be. It was a lot of work. And not that I'm against work, but it was like a lot of work. It felt very ego driven, at least for me. And it was very little payoff. And like everyone was angry and trying to prove something. And I don't know, it just like didn't really resonate with me.
Yeah.
And I felt like I didn't feel like I was angry enough to push that forward enough
Yeah.
like everybody else was. So
You weren't righteous about anything.
yeah, I just like, I don't
You're like,
know.
I don't really care about it enough to get that passionate, I guess.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. So when you started dipping into your newer age stuff and philosophy, where did it lead you?
Let's see. I mean, I went into some weird things. Like I think I watched all of like the Bashar videos at the time,
Mm-hmm.
which I wouldn't watch those now. But just helped me kind of like get outside of myself and into a new way of thinking. And
Mm-hmm.
um, let's see, what else did I go into? Just like, yeah, different new age writings and stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
like understanding things about like supernormal abilities and the third eye. And it's just stuff it's hard to find. It's hard to like find real information about stuff like that, and kind
Mm-hmm.
of like to understand what's happening inside of me and who can speak to that.
Because you were having these existential experiences
Hmm.
of like just transcendent and like the feeling the power of the infinite intelligence type stuff.
Yeah, I was more feeling like connection to things that I didn't understand, like feelings, because like I said, I don't really see things, so I was like feeling inside of me things. And
Mm.
um yeah, nothing could really make sense of it for me, which is funny because this book here, Juan Falun, like explains everything about like supernormal abilities and things like that. And I
Mm.
actually explains more than I could find anywhere else.
Awesome.
And it's influenced a lot like my work more recently.
Awesome. How did you get into being true to you? And we'll talk about what is being true to you, but how did you even end up there?
Yeah, so let's see. I started so you mentioned the new we were talking about the new age stuff, and I ended up having to leave Miami, coming back to Chicago area, and I lived there for 3 years. And I was still really struggling with depression, and
Mm.
that's something I had dealt with since I was a kid.
Mm.
Like as young as I can remember, I felt like a depression or a sadness. I mean, there's even videos of me when I was like maybe 3, 4 years old, where like someone in my family that I didn't like want to talk to would be asking me a question, and I would be
Yeah.
like hurt by them, and I would just like
Yeah.
not want to even answer. And um
Just so sensitive in that
mhm.
environment, but no one to really truly express your emotions and the way you're
Yeah,
feeling. Wow.
yeah,
So you're
so
shutting down.
right, there was a lot of shutdown. And then I moved back to Chicago, and I was still dealing with that depression. And it got really bad in Miami, and it kind of like I lifted myself out of it after taking some antidepressants. Um, is that my phone?
Yeah, it's okay
Sorry.
though. We can either, if it goes away, it goes away. Otherwise, we can let it be.
Okay.
It's up to you. It's
Oh, we
easy
can
to,
just let it be.
cool.
Wish I had turned it
It's all
off.
good. It happens.
So let's see, where was I? Yeah, I was struggling with depression. A friend of mine was doing ayahuasca journeys, and so I had started like dabbling in psychedelics at the time, like
How old were you
psilocybin,
here?
LSD, like my early 30s, I
Okay,
think.
cool.
Yeah, and so I started going to ayahuasca journeys starting in like 2017 through 2019. I think I did like 9 or 10, something like that. And
Where were you doing then? I'm just curious.
in the suburbs of Chicago, there
Okay.
was someone that was recommended through a friend of mine. Someone that lives in this area actually in Sedona.
Hmm.
He's a friend of mine from Chicago, and he recommended this person. And so I started going to that, and then like more and more would open up. And one of my journeys was like move to Colorado. Like it
Really?
didn't say that, but
Yeah.
it kind of brought me to this area where there's like the red rocks.
Yeah.
And I was like, there's only a couple places that are like that, and they're in the Southwest. And there's some in where my brother lived in Durango, Colorado, where I'm currently living, and
Mm-hmm.
then like Sedona is another area. So I was looking into this area to move to. And and then I ended up moving here because it was Durango, because it was easier to move
Mm-hmm.
there because I had family there. And I met Deanne. We were introduced through a mutual friend from my ayahuasca journeys,
Cool.
and she met me in June, I think, and I was like going on a camping trip, and then the next week she hired me. So it was
Oh,
like right
cool.
on the spot. I've been working for her company for about 6 years,
Cool.
almost 6 years.
What did she hire you as initially?
Just like do a little bit of everything in
Like
the background,
invent positions for you type
like
thing?
yeah, kind of like help her with like, she was working on her current coach training right now, and so I was like editing our handouts and like
Cool.
doing some back end, and I just take on more and more of her work over time. And
Mm.
then after I finished the coach training myself, and I was already trained as a coach through a different program, I started to lead the coach training right away, and
Cool.
a good fit.
Yeah.
It's weird when you're put into a certain role, like the information you need just kind of comes to you.
Yeah.
there's a lot that's very intuitive about coaching.
Mm.
And so people ask me questions, and like I would just go really deep into my work with other people and what I learned, and like, my own personal work, and that influenced that.
Beautiful. And you and Deanne probably just had a really quick trust and respect for each other. And I feel like that's what matters in relationships. And it's like, let's figure out a way for you to help me and I'll help you. And
Yeah.
it creates something new that you didn't know would even be there together, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I mean, it happens over time. Like I mean, she's one of my closest friends, but we've had our ups and downs. We've had times where things are great. We've had times where there's like tons of friction.
Yep.
And yeah, I mean, I think at first I was just working for her for many months, and then, as we're growing together and sharing more together, then um you get closer with somebody. And so
Cool.
then you get too close, and then you have to back off a little bit, and then
Sure.
there's like these weird fluctuations that happen in relationships.
Yeah. Especially with business. Things that,
Mhm.
and hers growing so fast in such a time where this whole field is exponentially taking off.
Yeah,
It's probably hard to manage that, especially when people are trying to
I think
steal
so.
information and compete, and there's so many layers to it.
Yeah, I think people don't realize like it's so easy to like want to think your boss is a bad person, or they just care about money, or they just care about this or that, but like you don't see things from their perspective. And
Mm,
what I can say that's been nice about being true to you is like, Deanne has really shared a lot from her perspective, so I can know a bit more about like, she's responsible for a lot, and there's a lot of pressure on her.
I bet.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of just not nefarious, but people maybe that say they have good intentions and they're not so good, in business
Yeah.
in general, any business. But, and then you're
Yeah.
like, wow, I didn't realize, because she's a good person and probably wants to help. And then all of a sudden you can be taken advantage of, or at least people try to.
Yeah, and she's always been really weary of that. So like I always thought like maybe she's a little paranoid about that. But like then I saw a ton of people try to steal her business.
Yeah,
Like it happened
exactly.
over and over, and I was like, "Oh wow, she's not being paranoid."
Sure.
Like that's really happening.
Yeah. So tell people, because I know it being true to you is now, I didn't when I met you guys, but tell people about it a little bit. And what is it and why is it so cool and why do you work for them?
Yeah, so being true to you, we are a coaching company. We do psychedelic integration and addiction recovery, and really it's a transformational company. So it's about supporting people through the process of growth and transformation.
Cool.
And so let's see. So trying to think of what else I'm going to say about that. I don't know. I'll let
Yeah,
you
well,
ask
there's
me.
obviously a really big boom in the psychedelic medicine and healing spaces now, and they're popping up everywhere, and they didn't
Hmm.
quite exist back in the day. So it's a necessary part of it, the integration piece that's usually missing.
Yeah.
And it's missing from the conversation. And a lot of times now it's a buzzword, integration, but maybe talk a little bit about like what you think integration means and why it's so valuable to even consider having that piece.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think of integration as just like taking something you've learned, like an insight, and making it part of the whole of who you are. So how do you make something part of you? Because you can read a book and
Mm-hmm.
like understand it intellectually, but to actually live it is something that's different. And so that's how we work with people is like I did this ayahuasca journey, or I did this ketamine journey, and like I gained so much, but then 6 weeks later, 3 months later, they're back to where they were. They're feeling depressed again. And I went through that process too, where I'm like, I thought that I'd gotten over my depression. Why is it back?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's the integrative process that really stops that from happening, that cycle of like consuming information and then just kind of flows back out of you. It's
Yeah.
like consuming and actually digesting that, and it becomes part of your whole body.
Right. And
So
then the
that's what I think of
preparation
it.
piece is part of the integration piece,
Hmm.
which you guys are good about.
Yeah, and you see, like when you get into the work, you see that it applies to every area of life. It doesn't matter if you're doing psychedelics, like you could do it without psychedelics. It's the process of like taking in what is the world telling me, and like learning from it and making it a part of your whole life.
Mm, yeah. And so now there's clinics popping up everywhere. And if there's a lot of first responders that I work with that are getting curious about it because they're seeing it become mainstream. And I love these people. And I'm like, okay, they call me a lot of times because they know a little bit about my part of it. I've been involved in this field, I guess you could say, since 2011, around that time, because I've had my own transformational experiences, and I did not know what integration was at the time. I just got lucky and landed the ship and got to integrate it. It took some time,
Yeah.
but as time goes, I've become more and more conservative when it comes to talking about psychedelics and plant medicines and just the whole conversation, because you start to realize that it's not all just rainbows and butterflies, and some of the dark and the shadow sides of it as an industry or as a topic in general needs to be talked about. And I think that if it's talked about more holistically and honestly, people then have the ability to enter it without being either taken advantage of or being caught up in the hype and continuously going back to the wishing well and thinking that this peak experience is the thing, and you become evangelical. It's very easy to, because it happened to me where I'm like, everyone needs this. And,
Yeah.
that's beautiful because you want to share the transformation with others. And so next thing you know, you're running workshops and you're probably not qualified. And so there's a lot of messiness in it and profit. And so I'd love to just talk a little bit about the shadow so that we don't miss it,
Yeah.
because you've probably seen quite a bit in your own perspective. And then we'll talk about all the good and the transformation and the beauty behind it and how powerful they can be for that, because there is that. And that's why I like to talk about the shadows, because I care about these things and I care about people, and so do you, which is why I like you and Deanne. And there's so many good people in the space. And then there's people that are doing things that I'm like, man, this thing could go off the rails and we may
Yeah.
not be able to have it. And it might go back to even worse than it was when it got shut down in the 60s. So I
Yeah.
just think it needs to be talked about. And I know you're willing to do that. And so is Deanne. And so are a lot of my other friends and people I love.
Yeah.
So maybe we talk about what are some of the things that you're seeing that you would like to not warn people about, but just that you would like to see become either fixed better or what we could do better to prevent it, things like that inside of the whole field of psychedelics.
Yeah. And I'll mention first, like, just my role in being true to you.
Yeah.
I manage um, our, I manage our coach development, like after people finish the main coach training. So I'm part of leading the coach training program. And then it's like continuing to mentor and train coaches after that, like help them to work through the different challenges that come up. So we offer like peer mentoring and like different resources to support people when they actually start coaching other people.
Mm,
I mean, I can't tell you. I just have so many weird things that come to
sure.
us. I'd say the biggest issues in the psychedelic industry that I've seen. So yeah, there's people that aren't qualified that are running retreats and giving people medicine,
Mm-hmm.
and I can go into that and what I've seen with people doing that too,
Mm-hmm.
and what it looks like to give somebody too much medicine. I also see people constantly going to medicine to look for their purpose or to like look for insights, and
Mm-hmm.
because they feel that that's where they connect to their higher power.
Yeah.
And that's really problematic for a lot of reasons. And then let's see, I see people um, kind of going off track, like, and starting to see things that they don't want to see, and like having like entities or things that are like coming into their space
Mm-hmm.
that they're scared of, and I've seen stuff like that happen a lot. So I think with psychedelics you want to be careful to be discerning with how you use them, because like in the ketamine industry, a lot of people, they're not used to psychedelics. They're going because it's like, oh, my antidepressants aren't working anymore, so
Yeah.
I'm going to try this because everyone says it's really good.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think psychedelics should be the first step towards that. um, and there's two ways I work with, like, uh, you know people that are coming through. At first I'll tell them right away, like, it's not going to cure you, like you have to do the work, and I'll
Mm-hmm.
explain what that looks like. And I'll, we'll talk about like how we need to study your depression, like not try and make it go away. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's what I want my depression to go away. That's what everyone's saying. I don't want to feel anxious anymore. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, we have to get to know it. Like, we can't be afraid of it. We have to get to know it. Like, what does it feel like? How does it show up in your life?
Mm-hmm.
What are the voices telling you that are from the depression? What are the beliefs?
Mm-hmm.
And that's when you can start to dismantle that, because you start working with like, well, what are the false beliefs that are being projected onto you?
Mm.
So I think you know it's not about setting an intention of like, I don't want to feel depressed anymore, and then you wait for that to come true. It's you're doing the work and you're learning about yourself, and then you get into a cycle of integration where you're constantly listening and learning and integrating. I think that's the healthier way to do it. Um, let's see. And then speaking about people that just keep going back to psychedelics, what happens to them? Some people can go back a lot and they're usually okay. I mean, a lot of them are okay. Um, but it depends. Like, you always have to look at, like, what am I attached to that's coming up here? So am I attached to, like, always having to look at what's wrong with me? Like, I'm constantly in a state of trauma. If you're always attached to, like, having to find trauma, well, if you believe in, like, past lives, you could dig into trauma for,
Forever.
thousands of lifetimes. So, like, it doesn't really make sense to do that. So I noticed that, people that are all about trauma tend to stay traumatized.
Yeah.
And they'll work through it, and they'll discover some things, but it all leads to the same narrative of that they're traumatized.
Yeah.
Um,
That's a fascinating piece that's taken hold in the last 30 years, if not more. But there's a trauma culture is the word for
yeah,
it. And I have Peter Levine coming on, as I said, and I love his work and I love learning about trauma and the body and somatic experiencing and
I do too.
all of this stuff. I think there's usefulness in it, and the body does keep the score and all that's there. But then it's like, okay, some of the languaging that I've been hearing from different folks in this field in particular, and it's starting to make more sense, is at what point are we looking at the self as the thing that needs to be fixed in context to the culture that's maybe sick? If
Yeah.
in looking at different cultures and how they relate to it, and so the collective meaning or the individual looking at the collective or the culture, it could be, like you said, a never-ending rabbit hole of just, now I need to get fixed or do the
Hmm.
work to then be in a culture that's not quite aligned. So now it's like almost insanity to that point, because you're like, wait a minute, maybe you should feel depressed when you start to read history or look at what's happening in culture at large.
Hmm.
And then, like you said, you recognize where's the depression coming from, or the sickness or dis-ease, and you see that it's like, well, look at what happened during COVID, or look at the nefarious actors, and it's like, that should make you angry, sad, depressed, all the emotional feelings, and you should feel that, otherwise you're not paying
Hmm.
attention. And then we work with that to then drive maybe a transformational meaning, like it drives you to maybe create a company or find a solution to the problem, which actually gives you sort of spiritual meaning.
Yeah.
So I like talking about the mixture of somatic and trauma, but also in combination with Buddhism or Stoicism or logos therapy, or things that give
Yeah.
you meaning. And if we don't have meaning, we're in crisis. And so I'd
Yeah.
love to just dig in a little more to that part, because people do seem to get trapped on that
Yeah.
solo, I need to go back to the next workshop or feel better. And so
And
it's
I have
fascinating.
trauma training too. I did Hakomi training. So
Mm,
it's similar to Peter Levine's somatic experiencing, and I've gotten so much from that. I mean,
awesome.
it's been incredible for my own practice, and I would say it's a lot of what I learned from that I incorporate into coaching people and teaching them how to coach.
Awesome.
The issue, I think, with trauma and with psychedelics is that psychedelics, for example, they break down, like, patterns that aren't working for you anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a level of, is it entropy?
Mm-hmm.
Is that what they call it? Where there's a breakdown that's happening, and that allows you to build back up what's healthy.
Mm,
And what happens is people just keep breaking down over and over and over, and
yeah.
then they're like, they're not able to really be in touch with people anymore. They need to be more reclusive, or only, be around people that resonate with them.
Mm-hmm.
I think you really have to know what you're building back up. And same with trauma. You go break down, break down. This happened to me. This happened to me. This is why I'm this way. And you have to know what you're building back up.
Mm-hmm.
And so we focus a lot on character development in our coach training. And people have asked me before, like, well, it seems like, if you're saying that healing trauma is about developing your character, like, it seems like what you're saying is that it's that person's fault for their character, that they are the way they are.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, that's not what I mean when I say it. And so I explained to them, if you are experiencing trauma, what you're experiencing is, I was violated, I was dismissed, I wasn't given a voice, I was I was feeling invisible, nobody made space for me. And what you're doing in the coaching relationship is you're making space for someone and you're giving them a voice and you're validating their experience and you're validating their feelings and you're helping them to accept themselves. You're creating a space of compassion. Compassion is a character that you can develop in yourself. And so it's not like, oh, you need to do all this work on yourself because you were traumatized. It's like, no, you start to create like a container of compassion for yourself, which you learn through your relationship with a coach. But the self-judgment isn't helping anybody. The just like guilt and shame and self-judgment, it's really not helping anyone. You need to like help people to create that compassion for themselves, that self-forgiveness.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And then it helps you to forgive the person or the thing
Yeah.
or the whatever happened. It's like you reckon with, okay, this happened, grieve, and then also forgive
Yeah.
that, because it's letting go internally of holding whatever
Yeah.
that disease pattern is. And then at some point you probably can almost feel grateful for the fact that it happened at some
Yeah.
degree, even though that sounds harsh, because it gave you the opportunity to now maybe connect with someone else, right? Who and help others and
Yeah.
prevent. And there's so much meaning that can come from that piece that I think can happen to be missed if you don't have an
Connection comes through
integration.
that. Yeah, connection comes through shared suffering. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know if there's another way that people truly connect. Like,
Yeah.
it's through vulnerability, which
Yeah.
is you talking about something like that you suffered through.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd love to go into eventually some of the clinician stuff with ketamine clinics and stuff in a minute. But as we're on this piece of compassion and vulnerability, that's something I've been really curious about, because Brene Brown and a lot of people pushing vulnerability into the masses right now, which is good and bad. People are on
I like
social
that
media
topic.
and it's like, okay, let's talk about the commodification of vulnerability. And
Yeah.
it becomes almost like, oh, I'm going to get attention for this. And so people, it creates false vulnerability too.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff in there. And even breath work, I've been lucky to find breath work later, and it helps me to go, wow, this is actually a good beginning phase for psychedelic stuff, because you can get into it in more of an exposure therapy setting where you're like, okay, I'm going to get into a non-ordinary state, get into the nervous system, but I don't want to go there now, so I slow it down. But there's a lot of people pushing people and priming people and doing breath work even, or psychedelic therapies, and filming it and then putting it on social media, and people are crying and screaming, and you're seeing that, and then it brings more people in and it boosts your business model or whatever it's doing. But it also creates an element that I've noticed that I don't want to criticize judgmentally, but it's reality and discerning, is to go, this doesn't look healthy, because that person in that phase, we've all been there maybe, in 10 years may not want to be on the internet for the rest of their life, having been filmed, even though they signed a non-disclosure or whatever. They're like, oh, I got the signature, so now I can use you for my Instagram reel.
Yeah.
And it also brings people to these workshops that want to be seen to get the attention, so it creates false vulnerability.
Yeah.
And anyway, so it's a part that I wanted to talk about with you, because you probably have a nice perspective on that.
Or people are going because they want that. They think like, I need to feel broken open. Yeah. I do have a different perspective, and it's good to hear that, because I didn't know that all that was going on. I'm not on social media all that much, but I like, and I think vulnerability is important, but it needs to be within the context of your own boundaries. Like, I think pushing someone into vulnerability leads to re-traumatization, to be honest. And so, part of what I do when I'm working with someone is like, doing somatic work, like what Peter Levine does. Um, you can, you don't even have to know somebody's story. You can just help guide them into their body, to what they're feeling, and like work at their own pace. And that's how you develop trust with your intuition again. You develop your intuition through trusting yourself. When you're like, I need to do more psychedelics to break through this like shell that I have. It's like, well, that shell's there for a reason. So that's why you're not supposed to just break through it and bust it down. You should honor it. It exists, and you should work with it. And so,
love that.
So when you're working with like when I'm coaching, for example, and I'm like doing a demo with somebody, like I always want to slow down and just go at the person's own pace and say, like, I don't want to put them into a space where they're going to just start crying or feel like I reveal too much and now I wish I could take it back. Like that's not healing for anybody.
Right.
it's healing when you like you can accept yourself for where you are and
Yeah.
work from that space.
I love that part, because even in the breathwork container that I'm feeling comfortable and have permission to work within, I'm
Mm-hmm.
like so conservative now, to where, because I came from some of the more intense workshops, I went to the Stan Groff workshops multiple times, and it's 3.5 hours, and they have these huge rooms of people that are from all walks of life, and God knows how many people are coming from what trauma, and
Yeah.
they would just ramp you up. There was no grounding component.
Yeah.
And I started to read all of his books and got so much out of it, because I think Groff is a pioneer.
Yeah.
But I also think, man, that's why I don't follow any one particular lineage or book or way of doing things. I started to go, okay, this was a good piece, but that was not what I liked. And so over time, I realized people need more help slowing down and trusting themselves,
Yeah.
and just encouraging that, and even doing nothing. Sometimes
Yeah.
just showing up and driving across town to be vulnerable in a setting is enough. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, how about you just lay there and listen tonight and see how that goes?
Yeah.
And then we'll give you a nice base, which I think everyone should have. A nice anchor is what I call it, where you feel safe, grounded, and supported. And I'm like, do that for the whole hour. That's medicine.
Yeah.
And then if you want to ease into something where you're moving energy and you want to feel, try it, but make sure you go back home anytime you need it. And that was what I realized was missing from any workshop I'd go to. I'm like, okay, we need more of this. And
Yeah.
it's not like I'm doing it the right way, but I'm finding things that seem to be old.
Yeah.
Like Don Howard would tell me that most of the medicine work wasn't in the cup or in the ceremony. It was what was happening before you got here. It's what happened after. And there's so much more to it. And everyone wants the heroic dose, and they talk about these transformational experiences. And you're like, maybe that's not even a good idea. Like you
Yeah.
said, maybe that would actually make it too overwhelming, or it cause you to go off the rails. Or
Mm-hmm.
so I'm just really conservative now with my approach to this stuff, even though in the beginning I'm like, everyone should do this stuff.
Yeah.
And maybe they should, because you don't want regrets. I'm not telling people what to do, but I love talking about the whole thing because
Mm-hmm.
it's important.
It is important.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just it's so many things are preventable. And there's so many like coaching and trauma programs that do induce trauma to work through it.
Yeah.
And what ends up happening, I've talked to some people that are involved with some or work with some, and people are constantly traumatized and constantly complaining
Yeah.
and just like making this whole big thing out of it. And I understand, but I think it doesn't have to be so extreme like that.
Yeah.
And even when I was trained and I don't think Hakomi did this purposefully, but the way that with certain people that were involved in my training and stuff, I felt traumatized like during my
Mm.
Hakomi training, a lot of it. And it made it harder for me to actually like sit and learn.
Mm.
Because I was just in a constant state of like my nervous system was on edge.
Yeah.
And the space was held well in some respects and not in other respects.
Mm-hmm.
Um and I think just the vulnerable nature, and if there was a bit more just like going at your own speed, I think that would have been helpful.
Yeah. So you seem to have a nice. I love the way that you approach things. I remember meeting you, and I'm like, this is one of the people that I wish we could scale.
Thank you.
Because the industry is growing. I really feel that about you, because there's people like you out there, and I've met them, and they're
Hmm.
just like anything. If you want to find a good mechanic, it's like, don't just Google a mechanic and go to the first one, right? You
Yeah.
don't do it with a dentist. You don't do it with anyone, a skin doctor, an eye doctor. So discernment is huge for this piece of when you start to go, hey, Ryan, I'm ready for a transformational ayahuasca experience. You did it. Where do I go? It's like, well, hold on a minute. Let's pump the brakes.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're curious, but there's so much to talk about. And where do you start with people as far as the conversation goes? Because you're one of the few people that are qualified and have done your own work, I feel. And I'm seeing this thing grow to where there's ketamine clinics on every corner,
Yeah.
and people are doing remote ketamine workshops with people they've never met and prescribing them to do it at home with no supervision. There's so much stuff going on where I'm like, this isn't going to go well.
Yeah.
And you want it to go well because people are awesome and we want to
Hmm.
help people feel better. And I see good in this too. I don't want to just be like, shut the whole thing down. Ketamine's bad. It's like, no, there's potential benefit for it.
Yeah.
But people aren't talking about the bladder issues and the
Hmm.
addiction piece and who's the therapist in the room. Is it Elaine, or is it some guy that just had his first trip and now he's making. So what would you say when you're starting to dip into this for people that call you? Like, say someone calls me at the firehouse and I go, you know what? call Elaine. Like I had
Mm-hmm.
Mandy call you because she wanted to do the program. I knew you were a person that would at least just have the real conversation because I know she's a friend of mine.
Yeah.
And now she signed up to go through it.
Yeah.
And it's not like any sales pitch. It's more like, hey, talk to an authentic human. And so what would you say to people if I said, hey, I'm interested in doing something because I'm at my wit's end and I've tried medicine and I've tried this. What do I do if I want to do ketamine or I want to go try psychedelic?
Yeah. I would say the first thing I do when I'm talking to someone is I look for like what is the actual pain point that's coming up. So like, okay, they're feeling depressed or they're feeling hopeless or whatever, but like I want to know a little of the history of it. Because I think when you just jump into psychedelics, there's like a whole lot that's being bypassed. And so
Mm,
I'd like to know like when did it start, and like if I can get to like help them to notice like a pattern and where it started and where it's coming up, it develops trust between us, and then they're able to like often move through it because you don't actually need the psychedelics for anything.
right.
They're helpful. And what I've seen them be really helpful for, like for ketamine, for example, people that are feeling overburdened, that they're triggered easily, like it helps them to have, they sleep better, they don't, they're able to catch their thoughts quicker and not just react to them.
Mm-hmm.
um, and so, you know, when they do go through treatment and they're experiencing like the benefits of neuroplasticity, then on the other side of it, you know, we know that some of those habits are going to probably come back. And that's when we start to break them down and we look at like, we explore a little bit about like what is actually triggering you. And we
Mm,
go a little deeper into that. What is actually like the thoughts that are coming up right before you're feeling depressed?
mm,
And they'll usually see that it is something like, oh, I just got off the phone with, you know, my mom or something, or I just had this thing happen, or it might have been like a longer pattern. So I think just by talking to someone, it's pretty easy to get to the root of why something's there.
mm-hmm.
What I see happening a lot too is people are coming in because they're like, I'm not feeling well, something's wrong with me. It must be a suppressed memory.
Mm,
And I'm like, it's not a suppressed memory. It's like maybe it is for some people, but it's most likely that they've developed a pattern over many, many years that they need
mm.
to break down.
Behavior
A
pattern, mind
behavioral
pattern.
pattern,
Okay,
like
not
a
the nerve.
thought pattern.
Got it.
Yeah, like maybe they tend to shut things down, or they tend to like they've numbed themselves for a certain reason. Then they're like, I can't feel anything, and I don't know why. I don't have any emotions, and
Mm-hmm.
so you have to start breaking that down slowly. It doesn't happen all at once.
Interesting.
And it's not going to just happen because you go through a journey. Like that can help start to crack it open a little bit.
Yeah.
But it's going to be like starting to pay attention to things over again. Like if you don't feel joy and you're like, I don't feel any joy in my life, you're not going to start by looking for joy. You're going
Right.
to start by looking for just things that you're slightly curious about, things
Mm,
that you find interesting. Like maybe I can make time for something that I find somewhat interesting. Checking in with yourself, like, these are all my tasks. And when I think about that, I just get depressed and hopeless.
yeah.
And like, if I give myself an hour to just do whatever I want, like, what do I want to do?
Yeah. And
And
then removing things too, maybe things that are causing depression or sickness, right?
yeah,
Little things,
yeah.
environmental or behavioral, I'm guessing.
And then like gratitude, I think like if you want to find joy, like it is important to start developing like a relationship with gratitude.
Yeah.
But for some people, and like for me with depression, that was too much.
Yeah.
It felt fake and I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
For me, it was letting myself explore my interests, even if they were not going to lead anywhere.
Sure.
Because we're so focused on productivity that like we don't make room for the things that we actually find interesting because they're not leading to some kind of goal that we have. And I
Yeah.
think that that's a mistake.
I agree. And then it makes me think of the somatic stuff, which we just talked about. He goes bottom up instead of top down, where it's not as much the mind first, it's more the body or nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
But it's even hard to get someone to even enter that particular approach if they're, I think of plants and things in nature, and I'm like, we aren't separate from it. We're little, sun
Yeah.
absorbing. So some people are walking around, they're not drinking fluids and they're not getting sleep, and so you just listen to what their behavior patterns are and you're like, do you ever go outside enough? Like even getting sun now, I'm getting obsessed with this relationship to the sun.
Yeah.
And that's so simple, but I try to get my someone like that I love most is my father or my mom. and they're right there. It's like you want to help the people you know first. So
Yeah.
how do you tell your mother, like, hey mom, I found out, I listened to 7.5 hours of Dr. Jack talking about what mitochondria does when you get outside for the morning sun.
Yeah.
She doesn't want to hear that, but I want her to just know that the sun is the ultimate medicine. It's like, so if someone's really not doing well, they want to go do ketamine, which I've noticed this is what happens. They want this authoritarian or someone to give them something,
Mm-hmm.
and they haven't even done any of the basic things to keep the natural plant healthy. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes you almost have to start there with the soil first and get that rich soil back to where it even has room to put a seed to then allow the thing to grow. So the soil is a mess. It could be the microbiome of the gut, and the diet's messed up from sugar, but you don't want to overwhelm people either. So it could be like
Yeah.
little simple baby steps of like, how do we just get the actual monkey, the living animal, just to where it has the opportunity to feel good energetically, to then even maybe that would cure it like that. You actually don't need anything. You're like, geez, I actually just need to go walk in the sun every morning. And you're like, geez, I feel so much better. So
Yeah.
I've been finding that to be like, dude, don't do psychedelics yet. Maybe wait. It's like
Yeah.
if you're triaging a scene, when I go and there's a bus rollover, I don't just jump in and I'm like, hold on, we need more resources
Mm-hmm.
before I even get off the truck. Or there's always so much more you can do to leverage the effect. And now I try to think of triage in decisions of mental health, physical
Mm-hmm.
health. And it's like, what's the first thing to do? Start cultivating a relationship with the breath and
Yeah.
start cultivating a relationship with the sun. See what happens. Do it for 2 weeks. Guarantee you, you're going to get rid of 80% of your issues.
Yeah.
And then you may be like, why was I going to do ketamine? Or maybe you do ketamine, but now you have a rich system with a higher vibration and it would go better,
Yeah.
especially if you can breathe.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, the thing is with that, and I think that there's so much benefit, and I think there's so many different pathways to take. And I do think when you go outside, it's literally like you're leaving your head,
yeah.
which is helpful. Like when you're inside, I'm in a home, it's almost like I'm in my head. My mess is everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I'm living in an externalized version of my own head, which feels messy and chaotic.
Right.
And then you walk outside and it's like, okay, like I can think about something different.
Yeah.
You hike a mountain, you're like, okay, I can get a new perspective.
Yeah.
So part of my process too, moving to Durango, is when I move there, I go to like 3 or 4 hikes so every week, and
Mm-hmm.
that helped to undo all of the thoughts and patterns that got wound up in my head, and just helped to undo a lot of that. But when I'm working with someone, I really think it's about tuning into them and finding out like where do they feel most connected, because I
Mm-hmm.
do know people like in our program, some of our main coaches, no connection to nature,
Mm-hmm.
just none.
Yeah.
And it doesn't really help them, and they don't really like it.
Okay.
And they try and stuff, but it's just not for them.
Yeah.
So I think it's about finding that person's pathway when you're talking to them.
Yeah.
So with someone like, if you're telling someone go out in the sun, get some sun, you might instead like look at like, well, what's something that's like that you enjoy or you're interested in, or like what's an activity that you like, or
Mm.
just starting to like explore that in different ways. It depends. Everyone's conditions and issues are so different. So
Yeah.
I'm speaking more abstractly.
Yeah. I love that when I went through the coaching program, I didn't go through to be a coach. I wanted to learn so I could send people to a good resource. And I wanted to just learn. Really, I
Hmm.
love learning, especially in the field that I'm in with firefighting and breath work and other things. But I liked also the freedom to not have to be trapped into the languaging model too of like, well, you better speak to the client in this way, because
Yeah.
I felt like it kept me from being able, because I don't want to have a client. I want to have more of just a conversation. So I don't know that I would ever be able to be a coach. Maybe I could, but I would have to really be mindful of a lot more.
Hmm.
But I would also be like, man, because my cousin who has been addicted to drugs for many years, I think the novelty piece of moving to Durango, like you said, I always told him just move or go on a trip even. It could be even to a little town within Arizona. I feel like novelty is just so good for you.
Well, it's
It's
neuroplasticity. I
neuroplasticity. It is
mean,
psychedelic. It's the
yeah.
same idea. You're going on a trip
Yeah, you're
and you're
doing
coming
something
back and
different.
you're different because of it. So,
You disrupt your routine, then you disrupt your routine here.
yeah.
So it makes sense.
So I love the curiosity piece you bring forth, because it could be reading a book is novelty and it's going on a trip. You read a fictional novel or a book and
Hmm.
you're in another person's mind, and it's incredible. So yeah, curiosity and wonder are medicine,
Yeah,
incredible medicine.
For me, one day, this is going to sound so silly, but it was like winter in Chicago, and I was like, I just want to do a puzzle, like a jigsaw puzzle. So I went out to, Target and I got like 1,000 piece or something.
Cool.
And like I wouldn't let myself do that before because it's not like it's a waste of time. That's what I
Sure.
thought. But for me, it's like an action. And this is what I think of coaching. It's like a puzzle. It's taking something that's chaos and finding the pattern and the order. So for me, it's really relaxing for my mind to do that.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that kind of helped me come back to myself, was just like taking something that's chaos and overwhelming and there's all these pieces and you have no idea where they go, and
That's cool.
creating some order with it.
Yeah.
And I think of coaching as that. There's a few things. Like for me, coaching is about creating order out of chaos. You're
Mm-hmm.
helping someone structure, whether it's structure their day or their work or whatever is overwhelming, or it could be creating an understanding of what's happening to me emotionally and physically. And that's still creating structure. You're having some understanding of how to interpret and understand my emotions.
Wow. Yeah.
So I'd say that, compassion, like creating that container where the person can just be themselves, and then curiosity, being curious about the person. And
Mm.
to me, those are kind of like the three things that I'm really looking at when I'm working with people in coaching.
I love that. And do you still work with individuals coaching, or you are?
I do,
Cool.
yeah. I work at this point in time, I'm working a lot with like executives, and that's not work I expected to do.
Mm-hmm.
They executives were coming to me more for emotional issues, and they were like being assigned to me from different clinics that I was working with, and then someone like that works, with a bunch of other executives, like their like groups that they have different forums and stuff. They would like refer all their friends to me, and
Yeah.
so again, like we would work on more emotional stuff, but the business is always in it 'cause there's always problems with, like, there's these problems with my business, and
Mm.
often it would be connected to these other patterns in the person's life. So that's what we ended up really working on.
Mm.
And then I think the other piece of it was working with that level of person. Like if you're running a business, there's often things that, maybe attachments that you have that you don't really see. You're like, I want to prove myself. I want to be successful. Like, there's these things which are important for running a business. Like you have to
Mm-hmm.
make money. Um, but like, there, some people would tell me like, I get really anxious to have to like network or meet new people or this or that, or like, be connected with people I work with that I have to manage, because if I'm friends with them and then it's hard to manage them.
Mm.
And what I found was like that shift working with that group of people is really, really easy. Actually,
Mm.
I help them focus on how can I think of myself as being responsible for people's experience rather than thinking about what I have to prove or what I have to do. So, like for
Mm.
example, if I have a new hire and I'm just like, oh, I don't want to have to meet them and talk to them, like what can I do to make them feel really good about coming into my company and make them feel secure and safe and invited?
Mm.
Or, what can I do to like better the people around me, or take responsibility for like how I'm showing up and the effect that me being in a room is going to have on someone.
Mm.
You think about being in a room with a new boss you've never met, or the owner of a company, and you're just a new employee, you're going to feel super nervous.
Yeah.
And
That's a
so,
different approach, though. How can I help you, not what can you do for me?
yeah. Yeah.
I
So I
like that.
think people are more going to have more allegiance with you, even if you're running a business. If you're like, you're really trying to make them feel welcome, and you're showing that you really care about them, then they're going to want to work harder for you.
That's cool.
And so that little shift of just like not thinking about myself and thinking
Mm-hmm.
about how my presence affects others makes a
Mm-hmm.
huge difference.
That's huge. And
Mhm.
then it transfers into all things, I guess, but you're just seeming to be matched up with these executives or these people, but
Mhm.
it probably works on the individual level for someone that's a mother or
With our coach training too, like when people come in for a coach training, they're like, I want to work for myself. I want to make six figures, because
mm,
that's what the coaching industry tells people they'll make,
yep,
which you can make that, but it's usually not right off the bat. Some
sure.
people it is. I don't want to have a boss anymore. And then when you come through the coach training, I'm like, I want you to start thinking about like, who needs the knowledge that you've gained here?
Yeah.
Where are the gaps in society that you can fill?
Yeah.
And when you start thinking that way, suddenly you're not afraid and in this scarcity mindset anymore of like, I need to get my piece of the pie. You're like,
Yeah.
there's a million gaps. Like, which one do I want to pick?
I love that so much because that's paradigm shifts for people. And it's happening to me in my life over and over again. And Don Howard, one of my favorite people, when I went to the jungle, you go with this list of things like, I wanna,
Yeah.
and that's how I was taught to pray growing up in the similar
Me
belief
too.
system is
Yeah.
I want, what can I get? Can you keep my family healthy?
Yeah.
Instead of going with, I'm lucky,
Mm-hmm.
I'm grateful, I promise, I'm showing up, I will listen and I will do what I'm shown type of thing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
how can I serve or how can I be grateful and then maybe find solutions to problems or give? And so it's more of an offering is what he called
Yeah.
it. And so I scrapped my list. I went with all these ideas. And after listening to him, he's like, come with an offering. What's your offering? And I thought, what the
Mm-hmm.
heck's an offering? Oh, and so I threw the list away and I thought I'm silly. And I basically said, I want to be present and be of service,
Mm-hmm.
and that worked out so much better. And
It
next thing you know,
does.
he's living here and I'm helping him. And I never thought I was going to bring the guy home. And that was my next 6 months of my integration, ended up being something I had no idea was coming.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I wouldn't have even been available to do that if I was looking for what can I get? How can I
Yeah. You
heal?
block yourself from seeing
You
it.
block it. And then
Yeah.
that becomes your interaction with everyone. And so even the podcast or breath work, it's like, how can I give the most useful thing that I have to offer to everyone that I meet,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully, or leverage what it is that they're doing and maybe help them see a different perspective but you're always trying to help the other instead of what can I get,
Yeah.
I love that perspective a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Yeah.
huge.
Even like if you're like, I want to be a more loving person and grow my heart, or I want to have more patience,
Yeah,
aren't you asking for God to give you things that are going to test your patience or things that are going to test your heart of love? Because the only way you can grow it is you're confronted with things that you don't love. Like, how
sure.
do I bring more into my heart?
Yeah,
Well, I have to be confronted with the things that I don't want to bring in.
yeah,
That person that hurt me, I don't want to love them.
yeah,
I don't want to be more patient.
yeah.
But it's like, how else are you going to grow your patience if you're not
And then you think
confronted with
in
that?
our culture, we think, well, let's get away from it or
Yeah,
run from it.
avoid it.
And Wherever You Go, There You Are is a book that I
Yeah.
love. And I remember when I was butting up against some things early in the fire service where I thought, maybe this culture's not for me, or maybe this job's not for me, or little things. I wasn't realizing that I have food, shelter, water, so much time off. I have a great job. It was me. And if I
Yeah.
quit and moved to Chile or somewhere, I was going to be in the same predicament.
Hmm.
And so I said, I'm not going anywhere when I have all the resources I've ever had and better than anyone in human history until I feel comfortable here.
Hmm.
And that was a good shift for me. And I always try to tell friends and people I love that maybe it's not about going anywhere and doing anything. Maybe it's about slowing down and taking account for what already is.
Yeah.
And the gratitude piece is accounting.
I totally agree with that. Like, maybe I don't need to like to leave my family and find other people to be my friend family, but like, and that's important too, but maybe I can like grow to be more a part of my own family and like,
Yeah.
address our gaps or yeah. And I would say I'm like the first person to admit I still have like a tendency to want to escape. Like
Yep.
for me, it's confrontation or like just difficult conversations with people, conflict. Like I
Mm-hmm.
just want to be like, I don't want to do it anymore.
Yeah.
I don't want to be a part of this anymore. I don't want to fight with anybody.
Yeah.
And like for me, that's been the hardest thing to work through is like to stay in relationships with people through conflict.
Mm.
It's definitely tries your soul, but it's
Yeah.
made me a better person through the process.
Yeah. I think we all deal with that to some
Yeah.
degree.
Yeah.
That's the human condition, of relationships and wanting to
Mhm.
feel good, but it's not all about feeling good.
Mhm.
It's about
Yeah.
feeling and then, yeah, changing. But I wanted to ask you what your perspectives are because I think one of the big things people deal with that suffer, including me, of course, is boundaries and
Mhm.
like the conversation around what healthy boundaries look like and how have they served you in your lifetime or not served you by not having them. And I'd just like
Mhm.
to hear your perspective on boundaries. I don't know why I keep hearing that piece come through and I'm like, don't forget to ask her about boundaries because I'd like to
Yeah.
know your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think of boundaries as like a negotiation. Like for example, like I don't think of it as like this person is toxic, I'm going to cut them out of my life. I
Right.
think boundaries are always changing. It's checking in with yourself and seeing what you need. But there's different levels of it. So just to give an example, like I had a client I was working with at one point who, was feeling like, my mom's addicted to drugs. Like she always comes over asking for money, and like, I just need to, like, I want to cut her off, but I feel like I need to help her. And it was just this constant struggle back and forth of like, help her, but cut her off, but help her,
Yeah.
but cut her off. And what we worked on was like, well, you giving her money, it seems like it's not helping her. It seems like that you're just feeling depleted and she's always coming back. So maybe that's not the way to help, but like, what are some ways that you would feel good about helping her?
Yeah.
And then, like, what are some boundaries you have? Like, okay, I don't want to buy her cigarettes. I don't want her coming over late at night uninvited. And so, like, these are my boundaries, but I actually feel good about setting those boundaries when I look at, like, how I want to help her.
Yeah.
I think what happens often is people, they end up creating a boundary and then feeling guilty about it
Yeah.
because it's not entering into they're not entering the part of it where it's like, or they're not listening to the part of it that's like, I also want to help this
Yeah.
person. And like what I've heard from clients too, and coaches and other people I've worked with, like their therapists and stuff, and this isn't everybody, but one of our therapists, one of our coaches mentioned that their therapist said something like, well, you should just, you don't have to help that person, so don't help them. And they're like, but
Mm.
that's not honoring that person's values. Like they have a value system that values family.
Sure.
So you're not honoring yourself by doing that. You're not honoring your client's value system. You're telling them like, oh, your value system is wrong. You should just not care. Like you shouldn't have to worry about this. You shouldn't have to do this.
Right.
I
I
think you
like
got
that.
to look at like, find the balance in between.
Yeah, I like that piece. That's huge because it's a way people love. My mother's
Mm-hmm.
like that. She's a giver, but she sometimes forgets to give herself space and
Yeah.
time. And so I always like to remind her, it's like, Mom, it's because you love so much. So it's a beautiful thing, but
Yeah.
you need to fill your cup because you're depleted or
Mm-hmm.
people are taking advantage of you. And so one of the things I've thought of in my lifetime, because I used to have really rigid boundaries. I grew up in a household where my sister was suffering and there was a lot of drug addiction and things from her. And so I had to really I had really hard boundaries and I didn't know about anything when it came to the
Mm-hmm.
nature of psychology. So my thing that served me for many years was just protect yourself
Mm-hmm.
and self preserve.
Yeah,
And
that
so
was
it,
me too.
yeah, it serves you and it keeps you safe. And then you're independent and you can thrive and you think, I'm not letting anyone take me down or
Mm-hmm.
but that serves to a certain extent. And now I've learned to dissolve boundaries and open up and try to help people and let them in to certain degrees that are healthy. But I've learned too to not just throw the boundaries out because now I try to help people realize there's healthy boundaries and that maybe you could benefit from thinking about boundaries as a way to um, prevent someone like maybe my cousin or my sister or whoever it is that loves you. They don't want to
Mm-hmm.
hurt you. You're
Yeah.
actually, but they're not capable because they're hurt right now or they're sick or they're going through so much. They're overwhelmed. So they're not able to prevent themselves from taking advantage or from hurting you in whatever way it is. So the boundary prevents them from hurting you.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're actually preventing them from hurting themselves because they hurt when they hurt you.
Yeah.
So it's actually doing a service to yourself because you're not being hurt, serving them in a way because they're not hurting you.
Yeah.
And then they can actually still trust that you're the one teaching them how to create boundaries, which are healthy.
Yeah.
So it's like a whole trifecta of someone's got to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And thank God I was able to provide a boundary to still have the relationship and to offer whatever I was able to offer that I thought was healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, it's a very complex subject, but I think
It is.
it's a way
Yeah.
to prevent people from being hurt, including yourself, but also them too.
And there's different layers to boundaries. So, like, I mean, and some people you might need a boundary where, like, you do have to cut that person off at
Yeah.
least for a certain amount of time,
Yeah.
and that's okay. Like, that might be you need your time to heal and to do some work.
Yeah.
Um, but I think as you go and you work more on yourself, like, I might not need this distance. I might just be able to have a boundary that's like much closer to me where like I don't have to let in what someone says emotionally and let it affect me.
Yeah.
Like that's a boundary you can work on where you can be in conflict with someone and not have to let it get you to that point of stress too.
Yeah.
So like it's not always needing to have physical distance. Sometimes it's just letting go of like we believe different things and that's okay. Like it's okay if it's okay if I'm misunderstood by this person.
Yeah.
Like that's one of the most healing statements I use with people is like, I'll have them sit and just kind of like, pay attention to their anxiety or whatever they're feeling and just say like, I want you to notice what happens when you hear these words.
Mm.
It's okay to feel misunderstood. And they're like, oh my gosh, they feel so much relief from that.
I like that.
Oh, I don't have to like prove my point. People don't have to think of me in a certain way. Like it's
Yeah.
okay.
And it's almost expected to not be understood when you realize the nature of consciousness
Yeah.
and that no one, we're all in our own head so much and we're all experiencing our own subjective reality. So it's pretty anticipated
Mm-hmm.
that they wouldn't understand you.
Yeah.
It's quite normal.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, okay, why would they understand me right now?
Yeah.
And then you're not needing that taking it personal piece, which
Yeah.
it sounds like you're reminding people of, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. I'd like to hear a little bit more if you have something to share about your position at Being True to You when you're actually teaching the coaches,
Mm-hmm.
some of your philosophy and approaches to like help people that are trying to be coaches.
Yeah. So I lead our discussion groups, which are twice a week when we're doing the coach training. And then me and one other person lead like a workshop on coaching skills. And when I learned Hakomi, for example, it was kind of all at once. And it was really hard for me to figure out what to do. It felt like just overwhelm for me. And so what I do when I teach coaches is we build on skills one at a time. So they sometimes feel frustrated by that because like, oh, it's moving too slow, or like, if we're starting by just like listening and reflecting back something, they're like, but is that all we do in a coaching session? I'm like, no, we're going to do one thing at a time. So we
Master
layer
that.
things on top of
Cool.
each other. Yeah.
Okay.
And what I found is like by the end, they're coaching and they're even like starting to do somatic work with people after like going through those weeks in my workshop,
Cool.
and with the other instructor too, with John.
Cool.
So the layers really help because then they kind of get to practice each skill and see. And like the other thing I do with coaching is I have people try it first. I don't tell them what the skill is supposed to do because then they have their own insights from it. And so
Cool.
then it's like the learning is experiential and learning is also like cerebral, but if you're just studying a book, you're not actually digesting the material.
Yeah.
So I'll have them like get into groups and like practice just reflecting each other back.
Cool.
And then I have them give feedback on it. And like the person that's in the client position is going to say how it felt when they receive the person reflecting them back. And the person that's the coach is going to be like, I felt silly doing that, or that, I'm not sure that that's really effective. And then the client is like, I felt really seen and heard for like one of the first times. I felt I could really slow down and my head stopped spinning. And so then the person that's the coach is like, wow, I've seen like real time results from this. Like, and so they keep doing it and they keep getting the results.
I love it. Cool.
And then we'll go into like, I'll ask them, what did you learn from this? And then we'll go into like some of the other things like that you might gain from it in time. But I think with learning, it's important to like practice the skill first, then learn about it, and then practice it again.
Okay.
Because when I try and learn something, if I'm just like going to a class, I'm like, okay. And then I get to the job and I have no idea what to do.
Right.
Like
so much different from the book to the actual application of it.
Yeah, like I had to detach a trailer from my car. And so my friend was like, okay, this is how you do it, and just kind of ran through it. Another girl to speak my language.
Yeah.
And then I got home and I was like, what?
Yeah, but if
and
she
I
had you do it while there,
exactly.
and you'll
So
have it in your body.
yeah, so I had to like watch a video when I got home. And there was things of what she said that I remembered, but it didn't take me through the whole process. And so I think like when you've actually done it a couple times, then when someone gives you feedback and teaches you something else, like you're like, oh, I already tried this. So now I'm going to try it this way and see.
So did you develop this program with Deanne's base? Like she already was doing it alone in the beginning, I'm guessing? Or how did this all come to be?
The workshop is mine. So
cool.
The coach training is Deanne. She developed that from start to finish, all 30 modules, and it's just incredible. I mean, you've been through the program. It's just
Did she leave the
a
nature of
masterpiece.
addiction in there? the nature of
It's
addiction?
still, yeah, oh
Cool.
yeah, we're still
Because I
doing
heard that that
addiction.
might go away because of the timing or something. And I was like, that was my favorite piece.
Yeah, me too. I mean, it might be an addendum training at some point. I think it might dig a little bit deeper into like the human condition and the human experience.
Mm,
So I don't think it's going to lose anything in that sense, but
cool.
there's pieces in the addiction part that could be maybe a little technical that maybe wouldn't apply to everybody.
Yeah.
But the main philosophy of it will still be there. So that was Deanne's. And then there were two other instructors that were offering like experiential workshops. One was John,
Mm-hmm.
and he's still going, and his is just gets better every year. His is fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And he has a certain way of working. And so that's all his material.
Cool.
Um, and then there was another instructor who ended up dropping out at one point, or there was like they ended up leaving. And so I had to jump in with like a week's notice to fill in their spot.
Mm,
And for me, it was like when I developed that workshop, I was really looking at like when our trainees finish the program, what's missing.
yeah.
And so I started developing it that way. And then the way I started teaching the class is just I refine the workshop every year based on like what people are getting and what they're not getting.
The
Because I think
feedback.
at first I was moving them through too many skills too fast. And
Mm,
so I've slowed down and made it like a little bit simpler.
mm-hmm.
And I found that like too much too soon, people don't retain it.
Yeah.
And so we've slowed down more. I've added a new, I used to go into like deepening questions to go into somatic work. And now I've taken a step before going into that into just, historical questions, just being curious and asking questions around like getting all the material you need.
Mm, cool.
Like if someone tells you, oh, I'm on SSRIs and like, they're not working anymore or whatever, I want to know like when did you start using them and what were you using them for? Because that can give me a lot of information of like what they were trying to band-aid with them
Sure.
and that what might be coming up now.
Mm-hmm.
And then like what does it feel like in your body and what are the thoughts and all the curiosity again. So
Yeah.
before we go into the somatic work now, we work on those questions first. And what I've found is like now people feel equipped to go in somatically. Like, where do you feel that? How big is it? Like,
Yeah.
is it moving or staying still? And
Cool.
so it's just making little shifts that made really big changes in how our community is able to coach.
Cool. And then I'm curious, do you teach to the business component how to even start or do or be a coach like in this way for helping these people?
Yeah, we have a business coach training, and then I run our alumni membership program. And so I just started running it this year, or like end of last year. And that's part of like the tracks that we're creating within that. So we have like ongoing skills training, but then like not just business, not just running your business, but like how to create content, how to create a course, like skills around those kind of things too.
Cool.
And then like specialty areas, like working with, like I'm doing a ketamine training in February. I'm doing like a 4-week ketamine integration coach training for our coaches that I'm offering in that program. So like, how do you specifically work with ketamine clinics? And then
Okay.
after that, it could be, how do you work with them in a business sense? Like, how do you write a proposal and go and, find
Mm,
clinics to work with?
cool. That's useful.
Yeah, super. We want to make it really useful so that like there's more coaches out in the world.
Yeah.
Like the more coaches that there are doing important work, the more there's going to be a demand for coaches.
Right.
So some people, I think they're like, oh no, there's not enough work. Like we should not have more people become coaches because we're not even finding work. But that's
Yeah.
not true. The more that there are, the more there's going to be a demand.
Especially good examples of what it is that there's value in.
Mm-hmm.
So if people experience the best situation, they're going to go, I need that. I need that. And so you're
Exactly.
looking now for quality.
Yeah.
And that's part of the scaling of integrity and quality that
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing needed most because things are scaling so fast. There's an abundant need for so many things. But like you said, helping them to see not how can I get or how can I create or how much money can I make. It's like
Yeah.
start thinking outwardly, like look at all there's a million ways to add value,
Yeah.
always, forever. There's always a new solution or a new,
Always.
so getting people oriented towards the like, this is a huge
Mm-hmm.
industry. It's not going away. How do we do it the right way or a better
Yeah.
way?
And there's always your market. Like even if there's someone that does it better than you, they're
Yeah.
not getting your, like there's your people that are going to come to
Yeah.
you. And so,
Because it's your flavor, your
mhm,
personality, your profile of
So when
doing
you,
it.
yeah, when you saturate yourself listening to everything, you're just like, well, what can I add to the conversation? And it's like, stop listening to everyone, start tuning into like who are the people you want to reach and start speaking to their problems.
Yeah.
That's how I got so many people, through my own business is like, I'd hear business owners talk about like, oh man, like I'm running a school and there's all these issues with the students and their, emotions are all over the place and they're complaining and they're this and that. And I'm like, I can help you with that.
Yeah.
And you just start listening and filling in the gaps for people and like, problem solving is really what it is at its core.
Yeah.
You just
And
get better
it's
at that.
like coffee shops, I think of, are everywhere. And
Hmm.
it's not like they're going to go out of business because people like coffee. And if you make a really yummy coffee spot, you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
So even breath work with my little micro side thing that I do, I've never once worried, oh no, there's a bunch of, now breath work's so popular, it only actually brings more people to me because they're Googling breath work and then, or they go somewhere and they try breath work and they go, that just wasn't for me, but so and so told me to try you. And it's only brought more people, the popularity.
Yeah.
So it's weird how that works, but especially if you're providing the unique way that you do it, because no one's
Yeah.
like you.
I mean, I even think that there's something to be said for like, even if someone is lacking in skill, if they can hold the container, like
Yeah.
you might go to a coffee shop that's like, the coffee's okay, it's mediocre, but you just love the people there.
Yeah.
Every time you walk in, they're like so kind to you
Yeah.
and they want to know how you're doing. Like, if you create that for a client,
Yeah.
they're already going to start healing from that
Yeah.
because they're going to feel like, wow, I'm appreciated, I'm loved. Like, these people want to be around me or this coach like cares about me, actually
Right.
wants to know how I'm doing. And like I would say that that's more important than like really great skills even is like that container.
Yeah. I like that.
Mhm.
Cool. How do you see ketamine scaling right now? Is it going well, do you think, or is it going not
I
so
th-
well?
I think the ketamine industry has experienced a little bit of a dip from what
Hmm.
I've seen, and I still think it's proposed to increase over time. Like we're supposed to see like substantial growth over the next few years.
Yeah.
I think with the Matthew Perry death and just some like regulation coming in, I think we've seen a little bit of a dip.
Mm.
I also think it's expensive, and
Yeah.
that's part of it. And so you're like, I'm spending $4,000, $5,000 for this. What if it doesn't work? And that's one of the biggest fears that people come into ketamine with is like, there's two big fears they have. One is like, I'm afraid to lose control or like what I'm going to see or what I'm going to experience. And
Hmm.
then two, which is even bigger, I would say, is that it's not going to work.
Got it.
And that's where the coaching piece comes in because it's like, to me, it's an insurance company on um, working with ketamine.
Yeah.
Because, like, if you're working with someone that's going to help you integrate everything that you're getting out of it, like, it's going to work.
Yeah.
Like, everyone that works with a coach that knows how to work like with those kind of treatments,
Hmm.
like, and they're able to work with whatever the person has coming up in their life, like, they're going to be able to support them and you're going to be able to catch the person when they fall into dips.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, you're going to feel depressed again. Yeah, you're going to feel all the things you felt before, but you're going to have someone there to point out, like, you were depressed every day before. Now it's once a week.
Yeah.
Now it's once a month.
Right.
Like, and they're going to start bringing your attention to that. Because when you get stuck in it, all you think is, like, I'm depressed. I'm always depressed. It's never going to get better.
Right.
And then you start to see, oh, that's not the case. I'm just feeling this way now, but it's actually gotten significantly better.
Yeah. That's awesome. I've met people personally, many actually, firemen that have used ketamine and found it to be just transformational. And they're
Yeah.
like, tell everyone. And it's like, cool. That's great that you found that. I'm curious what your perspective is on the war on drugs and if drugs were decriminalized or they weren't illegal and they were available in a different way to where it wasn't just through the medical model. How do you think you would approach giving someone advice, or what would you refer them to as far as the most beneficial bang for your buck return psychedelic?
Mhm.
Is there one, or do you think it works different for everyone? Or what do you think about the nature of ketamine being the one that's legal now? And because I always think, man, it's a bummer that that's the one that people get to do, the synthetic one that's a
Yeah.
disassociative in a way. And that's cool. That's all we get to work with within the regulatory process.
Yeah.
But like mushrooms or things that have been around for all of human history and they're natural. And I've had my own experiences where I'm like, these are medicine or can be,
Yeah.
and it can be done in the creek and it can be done in ways where you're like, geez, nature and, nature, eating nature and being in nature for me was transformation. I'm not saying that's the way either, but what do you think about the nature of the war on drugs? And then if you had to look at it best bang for your buck, what would you say would people be getting most benefit from?
Yeah, so the nature of the war on drugs. So I'm not for legalization. I'm for decriminalization, yeah, but not for legalization because I found that when something is too easy to get, it's so easy to abuse, and like drug use in general leads to so many other like bad things. Like it can lead to crime and like things like that or it can lead to just checking out of society. Like sometimes it's good to have things that you want be a little bit more difficult to get and to have consequences for getting it, because then you don't go so far down those paths. So I think consequences are a good thing when it's something that's bad for you. So I don't think that like,
Mm,
and I'm not talking about psychedelics, I'm just talking about drugs in
yeah,
general.
all drugs.
So I'm not for like just openly using whatever you want whenever you want. I think that sometimes it's important that something be a little bit difficult to get. But I do think decriminalize for sure.
And what do you differentiate when you say those two terms? Because that's a big deal for people to understand when they step into
Hmm.
this field. They have never heard those two terms
Legalize is like you go buy it in the store. Decriminalize is like you're not going to be like persecuted. I mean, like
for growing it or for
right,
having it on.
right, just
Okay.
for selling it, right? So or using it or
So it
whatever.
keeps a regulatory process in the middleman if I wanted to go, say, marijuana industry.
Hmm.
And is that a good example of something where you could look at decrim versus legalization and where it could go wrong if it was one or the other?
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I mean, I don't have like to be honest with decrim and legalization, I don't really have a strong opinion on it. It's more just kind of like, yeah, I mean, I could see how it maybe wouldn't be great, but
Yeah.
I mean, people will give different arguments, so
Yeah.
I'm not like
Okay. Yeah.
super,
And I don't want to hammer you on that. I was just more
yeah,
curious about people's perspective and because the only problems I've seen with like there's a lot with marijuana, but I'm like, yeah, now people are the person that's passionate about growing marijuana that you'd want to go to the farmers market
yeah,
and get the marijuana from is now stomped out of the market by the big corporations that are spraying it with pesticides and capitalizing on it, and they're tied to other industries. And so you're like, dang, that didn't work out good. All the
yeah,
small farmers got squished out, and
yeah,
now everything's like 90% THC, and they're pressing it, and they're so
yeah,
people are blasted out of their minds, and there's no education on it as far as like, hey, you go to the counter and they give you too many gummies. So there's a lot of problems with drugs in general.
yeah,
It's a big messy thing, and I think education and teaching
yeah.
people that like psychedelics are not a glory drug. Don't just say they're healing and they're medicine. Let's just say they're major powerful tools for transformation, and they can be good and bad. So don't just think like mushrooms are medicine. So now start microdosing every day and eating heroic doses. And it's just such an
Yeah.
interesting subject. And the way it's portrayed in our culture is like right now, psychedelics are almost being pushed as awesome. Ketamine's awesome. I've heard people get on stage at conferences and they're amazing. There's no side effects. And then you're like, but hold on, just be honest and say they're powerful tools. Be mindful of who's in the room.
And there are side
And
effects.
there's side effects.
I've
Yeah.
coached multiple people off of cannabis addiction even.
Yeah.
Like there's side effects to that.
And they're addictive. Like
Mhm.
people say ketamine's non-addictive, and you're like, well, I know many people saying how clean they've been off ketamine for 3 weeks because it was ruining their life.
Yeah.
So and I'm not saying shit on ketamine. I just really like to be honest about all of it and
Yeah.
help people approach it with more discernment.
Yeah, and I mean, and like I said, I don't really have a strong stance. Like I'm definitely against like prosecuting people for drug use. You know, I think there's better ways to deal with it.
Yeah,
But I've found even with people I know that detox people, like if the detox is too easy, the person is more likely to use again.
right.
Like the being difficult is part of the process of like getting off of something. Like you have to have like the strength and the gumption to like
Yeah,
move through that, and you develop strength to push yourself through. So I
yeah,
think it doesn't help to make things too easy.
yeah. And
But
that's also part of the microdose movement is like if you just feel good and you're taking these then you're not feeling the dis-ease of maybe the thing that would have helped you to change your life or circumstances or whatever
yeah,
with cannabis or any drug.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like, I mean, why wouldn't I just drink soda every day and eat sugar if, you know, there were no consequences for it? But it's
Yeah.
like you gain weight and then okay, like I have to, work. If it was just like you take Ozempic and you just lose all your weight instantly, but then there's side effects from that. So it's
Yeah.
like I don't think we're meant to have these quick fixes. Like
Yeah.
it's meant to have to do the work.
Yeah, I agree.
And that's where your character develops. Who you are develops through that process.
Awesome.
I like ketamine more than the plant medicines.
Okay,
And
cool.
part of the reason is because as I've done more work like spiritually on myself, um, and I don't use psychedelics anymore, but I felt better using ketamine because it's neutral.
Mm.
There was a neutrality to it when I did it. I felt like it was kind of like almost had a robotic effect of like it does its job. This is
Mm.
its job and it does its job. And I didn't really like that in the past. I liked more connecting to a spirit.
Yeah.
But as I've kind of progressed more on my own path, I've been like, I'm not sure I want to let this spirit in. Like, I'm not sure I want to give it influence on me in this way.
Mm.
And like, what am I giving in myself if I, take this on? Like, I think there's always a give and take
Yeah.
even with nature.
Cool. I like that perspective.
Like
And like
Native
more of an
Americans do that. Yeah.
engineering versus art or something, or
Yeah.
it's like more I'm going to do this particular, and
Yeah.
then the component of suggestibility, just being mindful of who is conditioning the room or the space or
Hmm.
whatever's going that has to do with environmental factors while you're under
Yeah.
the influence.
Yeah. I feel like there's more of a neutrality to it. I've been curious about ketamine, to be honest, about like what is, because I think everything has spirit behind it, though, even though I say that there's a neutrality to it.
Yeah.
And, there have been many cases of people drowning on ketamine. And so I've been like, what is it about? Like,
Hmm.
maybe it's like, there's an aspect of like pulling you to the water a little bit or something. Like,
Fascinating.
yeah, I don't know enough about it, but there's when it happened with Matthew Perry, I was looking into it, and like even some of the early psychonauts of ketamine died from drowning.
Yeah, that is
So
interesting.
yeah,
And it's also interesting that John Lilly spent time building the tank and
the
floating on it.
tanks, yeah,
So I wonder, and you don't know, no one, it's a mystery and it's curious, but like, yeah, the tanks and the dolphins component, and
yeah.
there's
And
interest.
people see that. I had a
Yeah,
client that saw stingrays. Like there's
yeah,
like a water aspect to it.
yeah. And then there's the alien piece where some people think there's an interdimensional, and same thing with ayahuasca and other things. So it's just
Hmm.
curious, but yeah, I like thinking that people should do with sovereignty and good discernment what they want. But
I'm kind of the same thought. And I guess when you're talking about war on drugs, I'm not thinking about psychedelics. I'm thinking of drugs across the board. So I'm
yeah,
thinking heroin, cocaine, like
absolutely.
everything.
Yeah.
And then I'm thinking, do you want everything to be just open and legal and stuff like that? And I'm like,
Mm.
I got to think about what the long-term
Yeah.
impact of that would be. So I
Yeah.
think it's complicated.
It is. It's not like this is the way we should just go.
Yeah.
It's like, maybe not. I don't know enough to do that. But I've
Yeah.
listened to, say, like Carl Hart and other people, and he's like, he's a neuroscientist, and he gets on stage and he's like, I used heroin with my wife last night and I'm here today, and I would hate for you to say that I shouldn't do that. And I'm like, I respect that. He's very intelligent and interesting. But I also go, you might have the makeup and nervous system and capacity and knowledge to do that.
Yeah.
And
And
if you were
someone
to
else
give
might
that to
not.
someone else, it takes them off the rails. But like,
Yeah.
I don't want people to go to prison either, because that just is not the solution. It's,
Yeah.
so who knows?
And I mean, it's just not good for you.
No,
There's
there's
that
no,
aspect.
and
It's,
there's like business behind it where you're working at Hickman's Farms now for $1 a day in
mhm.
the worst conditions. So there's like a weird thing tied to the war on drugs that's so much more nefarious.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
anyway, I don't want to go too dark into the shadow, but because I would like to hear any more you want to say about Shen Yun and that whole thing, and what you study in that philosophy. Otherwise, we can start to wrap things up, because this has really been
Sure.
fun.
Yeah, because I'm going to Shen Yun today, so it'll be, and I talked a little bit about it at the beginning when we were speaking, but I went more into Falun Gong. But Shen Yun, I guess, part of what I think is important to know about it with the connection with Falun Gong is that most of the dancers are Chinese or Chinese American, not all of them. Almost all of them are, most of them practice Falun Gong. A lot of them come from families where their parents practiced it. There are dancers who, like, you can't do any photography during Shen Yun because there are dancers who still have family in China, and the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, will target their family in China.
It's
So
amazing.
there's one of the principal dancers. His name's Stephen Wang. You can look him up. his family, because he's a Shen Yun dancer, his parents were detained, they were tortured, and like I think his one of his parents has disappeared at this point. So when you think you're just like, oh, it's beautiful, I want to take a picture, but you don't know that that could actually be harming one of the dancers who's
Yeah.
like just wanting to tell people that like this is a good practice. I've gained so much from it. I'm not trying to get anyone else to practice it. I just want people to know what's happening in China.
Yeah.
And the real mission of Shen Yun is to revive the 5,000-year-old culture of China, which is based in Buddhist and Taoist philosophy and religion. And
Wow.
that 5,000-year-old culture has nearly been destroyed in the last 100 years under the Communist Party.
Mm.
That's how quickly communism has destroyed that 5,000-year-old culture, smashing relics and
Man,
idols and statues of Buddhas.
it's
And
horrible.
mhm,
That's so bad to hear.
yeah.
God, there's so much in that where I'm like, wow. The woman I spoke to the other day that just goes, oh, it's a cult. And I thought, well, my God, even if it was, say it's
Hmm.
culture, cult is a word for culture. I said, what if I wanted to practice yoga? Should I be locked up for it? Or whatever my belief
Exactly.
system, personal freedom should be first. You should respect other people's belief systems if it's not imposing upon your life. And that should be foundational for human beings on this planet. And
Yeah.
no one should be persecuted for their spirituality. And anyway, so we disagreed on that, but she had an interesting perspective because she was from there,
Yeah.
and I wanted to hear it, and we were able to disagree kindly, which is great. I think that's important because right now what's happening is a lot of people can't have confrontational or disagreements. So we just
Yeah.
isolate and we divide and we call the other group bad.
Yeah.
And instead, it's like, let's be curious and kind and respect each other, but let's talk about it. So it's really sad to
Hmm.
hear these stories,
You said she's from China?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that makes sense
And she
then.
was just talking a little bit about how awesome it is and how it's much better than here in a way. And I thought, well, what I brought up this particular thing, I'm going to Shen Yun, and oh, it's a cult. And I said, okay, regardless of that, have you heard that they're persecuting people and what it's about? And she said, oh, well, I don't know. And so we veered away from it, but
Hmm.
it's the ability to use a psyop and get people to think,
Yeah.
oh, bad, don't think about it. Meanwhile, people are dying or being persecuted for their personal belief systems, and it's really
Yeah.
sad.
Yeah, no, I mean, people from China, a lot of them think it is because of the media there
Yeah,
that like there's, one it's a party.
yeah,
So the one media source
yep,
is the same like, all over the country, and they're only getting this one
yep,
narrative of it. So if they don't meet people that practice it, they're going to think it's bad. That's why
right.
like people it's just so sad. I mean, it's so touching and moving, but like people in China, they go out every single day and they give flyers to people, and every single time they give a flyer to someone, they're like risking their life, but
That's
they're
so
trying to
bad.
save like their practice and even
Sure.
save that person because they want them to see truth, compassion, tolerance is good. And there's this picture I have on my phone from a
Mm.
guy in the early 90s in Tiananmen Square, and every time I look at it, it makes me cry. He's holding open a banner, and the banner says the three characters: truth, compassion, tolerance. He got persecuted to death. It didn't
Jesus,
even say Falun Dafa is good. It said truth, compassion,
that's
tolerance.
horrible. It's so crazy that it's this time frame in human history, and we're
Mm-hmm.
we're seeing this, and that no one's that it's not such a thing that's in our face.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that much money and power where you're saying the New York Times is writing hit pieces, and people, what ends up being the case here in America, it's everywhere, is that the media and people sell their souls when you do that. And you
Mm-hmm.
don't tell the truth. You don't
Yeah.
seek the truth. And it happened during COVID here. And it's like, we're in the middle of an interesting time where it seems like the best time to be alive. And we have all the resources we could ever imagine. And we have the technological capacity to like really live beyond
Mm-hmm.
abundance, but yet there's things like this going on, and
Yeah.
and concentration camps and psyops and ways of manipulating, and it's just sad. It really is.
Yeah, I mean, even in like in the psychedelic industry, when we've had like, when I've sat for people and stuff like that, or even when I've taken psychedelics in a group of people and everyone's like having fun, whatever, you can't forget the world that you're in. So I
Right.
get hyper aware of that, and I can't really like let loose in that way, even when I do psychedelics, because I'm like,
Yeah.
I have to look around and like, look at what's happening in the space and like be vigilant of it.
That's huge, because I think that's what a healthy psychedelic experience should be. Is, yeah, you want to feel good, and it can amplify as a non-specific amplifier. But if we're doing it as to heal your trauma, or to go to a rave and to dance, which is both fine.
Yeah.
Part of the healing is to look at the truth about the nature of reality, and to suffer and to grieve and to weep and to feel the truth. And so if I sit with medicine, which I do, not often anymore, very rarely, but I make myself in a hedonic calendar, I have it, and it's always uncomfortable and it's always painful. And I always give myself permission to fully feel. And for the first hour, it's not fun at all. And I usually hate doing it.
Yeah.
So it's not like I'm going to get blissed out and to feel good. It's not that at all. I want to feel good because I'm holding all the truth about the girl that burned on the fire call, or the trauma I've seen throughout my experience personally there, but also like you can feel the collective, and we all can if we give ourselves space, and don't try to feel good, as you've said throughout this conversation. Try to see the truth and integrate that. And it's such a beautiful part of what we've talked about, I think. So
yeah, and like the neuroplasticity aspect too, like if you're going out, for example, to party, like you're going to have fun, I just want to dance all night. Well, there's someone there maybe that has an agenda that's totally different, and they're using drugs too, and they're preying on people.
Absolutely.
And like when you go through something really traumatic on psychedelics or on something that's neuroplastic like that, the effects can be like even worse on you. It's like you're imprinting more trauma into yourself. So I think set and setting is really key.
Yeah. And just really finding the right place and time, and being due diligence to do that, because it is life-changing. Yeah. Well, cool. I always ask people, if you were going to die today, what would you want to share with the world?
Oh yeah, I should have thought about that question before.
It's better to be serendipitously presented with it.
If you're going to die today, what would you want to share with the world? That you come from the divine. That's what I would share.
I like that. Thank you, Elaine. It's really nice doing this. I'm happy people will find this. Whoever's meant to will find it. And I really just wanted to share some of your essence, your special person.
Thank you. I'll definitely send it out too.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you. Thank you for listening to the episode. Be sure to subscribe to the show on Spotify, YouTube, and iTunes, and rate the show. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
What we call reality is in fact nothing more than a culturally sanctioned and linguistically reinforced hallucination.